this Hall of Fame is part of our initiative. And it's an amazing part. And as I was thinking about today, as we're focused on Israel, the reason for the Manhattan Jewish Historical Initiative is because when you take a look at what New York is and the history of what the Jewish community has been in New York, it's probably one of the handful of great civilizations of our people, over 5,000 years. And it hasn't gotten enough credit for what it is. I started looking at who we're inducting tonight, and this will give you an idea of it. It's a cross-section. It's not just one part of our community, but it's a cross-section, and that's how diverse we are in what we've done. So when we look to Israel, we need to look to New York as well.
New York's Jewish community has shaped much of our city's history. The community is the source of much of New York's character. It is beloved and revered throughout the world. The lives and achievements of our inductees and the stories they share, and they will share them, provide a narrative of our city, one that we need to capture and preserve to ensure that the full picture of New York's growth and development is known to generations to come. I love when Howard says we'll be here in 200 years, because it's important to be here in 200 years. These honorees have impacted and continue to make deep and lasting contributions to social justice, to labor, ethics, art, law, sex education, of course, and relationships, spiritual life, from the pursuit of equality and peace throughout the country and the world. So thank you for being here, and we look forward to these amazing stories from these amazing people. Thank you. Our first inductee, Dr. Ruth Westheimer, she needs no introduction. She is a longtime resident of Washington Heights. She has attained world renown for her positive and frank discussion of sexuality and relationships. She is in Israel this week. She's unable to join us, but please turn your attention to the video because she sends her thanks to all of us.
Shalom. What an honor to be chosen to be a part of the Manhattan Jewish Hall of Fame. I'm so sorry I can't be with you. But you have to know that I live in Washington Heights, which was the place for Jewish immigrants to settle. And I'm looking over the George Washington Bridge and the Hudson. And not only that, I'm near Fort Tryon Park. And Fort Tryon Park has made many matches. Young people on Shabbat afternoon used to go there, and look how many marriages resulted, and with my help, how many wonderful Jewish children came out of these marriages. Now, I am very Jewish. I come from Frankfurt am Main. I come from an Orthodox Jewish family. I went to an Orthodox Jewish school, Samson Raphael Hirsch School in Frankfurt. And then in 1939, I was sent with a Kindertransport to Switzerland in a Jewish Orthodox children's home, the Wartheim in Heiden, and which turned to an orphanage because all of our loved ones, all of our parents and other children who had brothers and sisters did not make it. I base my entire life on the early socialization, the early years of my life, that I was in a wonderful family, a set of grandparents in the village, my grandmother living with us, and I certainly did get the values of being a Jew and standing up and be counted as a Jew. I went from Switzerland to then Palestine. I was a member of the Haganah. Watch out, all of you. I was a sniper. I can still shoot, but I don't shoot anymore. I was badly wounded on my 20th birthday on June 4th, 1948, both legs, lots of shrapnels in my body, But I was fortunate. There was a wonderful Jewish surgeon, and I can dance, and I had a wonderful skiing career. Now, my being Jewish helps me in my teaching about family life and about human sexuality. And I don't think that there's anybody that doesn't know how much I cherish Jewishness and my Jewish heritage, and how concerned I am about anti-Semitism today. And I go to Israel every single year. I speak Hebrew fluently, and I wish all of you shalom uvracha v'kol tov. And I'm Dr. Ruth Westheimer.
Well, it's a real honor to be here with Stuart Applebaum. We have worked together, as many of you have, with him over the years, especially in his role as president of the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union since 1998, and executive president of the United Food and Commercial Workers. Under his leadership, labor was an early and vital supporter of the New York Paid Sick campaign. That was a bill that I passed when I was in the city council. It meant a lot to me, and I hope to New Yorkers as time goes on, and even as the workers had that support in terms of their bargaining. Many workers in New York City did not, and yet the retail workers helped us under Stewart's leadership. In terms of a labor leader, and there are some great ones, but then there are the really great ones like Stuart Applebaum. So what is it about a strong labor movement that has resonated so deeply with the Jewish community? And this labor community, coming out of it, have been many leaders from the Jewish community like yourself, particularly in the past, but also hopefully in the future. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the history of the Jewish community and how it resonates and is part of this really important labor movement in our city and maybe in our country.
Many years ago, I was at a dinner with the wife of an Israeli cabinet minister. And she asked me who I was and what I did, and I told her about my background, and I told her what I do. And she turned to me with a bit of surprise, and she said, a union leader? Is that really a good job for a nice Jewish boy? And I thought it was a wonderful job for a nice Jewish boy, because I think that what we do in labor is work to make real the values we learned as we were growing up in the Jewish tradition. One of the first things I learned about as a young man was tikkun olam, trying to repair the world, make it better, and a sense of responsibility that we have towards each other. I think it's no surprise that when so many Jews came over from Europe, they came over with a sense of social justice and wanting to be involved in the labor movement. And when we look at the immigrants today, they're really no different at all from the Jewish immigrants who came over decades ago. And that it's only right today, as it was all those years ago, that we should be working to make our society open and accessible and accepting of all the immigrants that are here today. One thing my union has done that I'm very, very proud of is that we've worked to organize low-wage, often undocumented immigrant car wash workers in New York City. These are people who have been exploited. Their employers feel because of their status that the employer can do whatever they want, and the car wash workers would have no power to do anything about it. But working together through the union, car wash workers have stood up, and they have made a difference in their workplaces. Right now, they're fighting to get a minimum wage. They don't get the minimum wage. They get a sub-minimum wage, a tipped wage. And despite all the threats, they're standing up and trying to make a difference in their lives. And you should applaud for them. And to me, it just seems like a very natural thing to be doing. I find myself talking about the same things today as part of my union as I did many, many years ago when I was president of my Jewish youth group, my USY chapter, back in Hartford, Connecticut. So to me, it just seems natural, and I'm very proud that so many Jews, going all the way back to Sam Gompers and before, were leaders in the American labor movement. I'd say one more thing if I can. I know sometimes we talk about deficits in this country. What I know is that there is no deficit of knowledge, there is no deficit of wealth. What there is in the United States, though, and in too much of the world, is a deficit of solidarity, the understanding that what's most important in life are the ties that bind us together as a community.
A round of applause for the one inductee, very special, Stuart Applebaum. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here with my friend Floyd. We've had a few thousand discussions in the last 20 years. This will be the briefest, but a very welcome one. 20 years ago, Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan said the following: the most significant First Amendment lawyer of our age is Floyd Abrams. That was true then, it is today. Floyd, how many times have you appeared before the Supreme Court?
15.
15 times. And
Don't ask.
I won't ask.
The next question.
We can look it up. When you are a First Amendment lawyer, people sometimes lionize you and love the results that you get, and people sometimes are aghast at the results that you get. In both cases, you won. Let me try to take two of those most prominent cases in your career, and maybe you can give us a sense of the issues that you face when you're specializing in this area. In the 1970s, you litigated the Pentagon Papers case, one of the most important cases in American legal history. Richard Nixon was president. The Vietnam War was going on. Could you tell us why that case was challenging and why the result is important?
Try to put yourself back for any of you that are old enough to remember, and for those of you that have read about it. We were in the middle of the war in Vietnam. We were losing, or in any event, couldn't end it, or in any event, it was an increasingly unpopular war with a very divided country. In the midst of all that, Secretary of Defense McNamara decided that it would be a good idea to have a study done of how we got into the war. You might think you do the study before you get into the war, but the study was done. It was top secret, based on secret government Defense Department documents. And Daniel Ellsberg, who was one of the authors, who had been a Marine in Vietnam, who turned against the war, came to the view that the war not only was endless, but was evil, a war crime. And so he made available to the New York Times documents, almost all historical in nature, about how we got into the war and how government after government had really misled the public about why or why not we were in the war in Vietnam. So President Nixon decided that the government should go to court to stop the Times from publishing. And I, through a variety of mostly good luck, got to be co-counsel with a law school professor of mine, Alexander Bickel, who had argued, together with us, argued the case in the lower court, the intermediate court, and the Supreme Court, everything decided in 15 days. The ultimate result was that the Times won, and the impact of it, I would say, more than anything, has been that one president after another who has thought of maybe trying to go to court to keep the press from publishing something the president thought shouldn't be published, was told by his attorney general or the equivalent, you can't win. You can't win because of the Pentagon Papers
Floyd,
case.
if I can ask you, I mean, this was one of the great victories. 30, 40 years later, you were one of the attorneys to represent Senator McConnell and others in the Citizens United case. You won the case. Famous lawyers like President Obama, Hillary Clinton, and others thought this was one of the terrible decisions. What do you bring out of winning a case like this that many people consider unpopular?
Well, I think what you bring out of it is to vindicate the First Amendment. That's why I became involved in it. I mean, just think in 2 or 3 lines. What was this about? A conservative group made a movie about Hillary Clinton denouncing her at a time when she looked to be the Democratic candidate for president in 2008. Because some of the money that entity had was corporate money, under the law as it was then, it would be criminal for that documentary, a documentary of which I thoroughly disapproved politically, for it be on television or cable or the like. And we argued in the court that the First Amendment allowed them to go ahead with this movie and to put it on the air. And it's obviously very controversial, but it seems to me very much a part of that same First Amendment.
We don't have time to go into it, but I do want to just say quickly that we've been members of the Park Avenue Synagogue for many years, and for the last 10 years on Shabbat, there's a small group that sometimes gets together, and Floyd has been giving the talk about the portion of the week, the Parashat HaShavua, many, many times. We don't have the time to go into it now, but it's a second career that people do not know about, and he has put in as much research into those talks as he has to his Supreme Court. And it's been a pleasure to have heard all those.
Thank you. Thank you, Lord. Thank you.
As the co-chair of the New York City Council's Women's Caucus, I'm particularly happy because we're going to honor a New Yorker whose writing and advocating for feminism and women's rights has spanned decades and made a direct impact on the lives of so many women in our city. And you spoke on Letty being the embodiment of leadership. And I'm just so thrilled as someone who is a fairly young leader who is looking to walk in the footsteps of Gail Brewer and people like the public advocate Letitia James. It is just really my honor to be here. So I have a very short story about a direct relationship that Letty might not know about. I mentioned to her earlier, but when I was the legislative director for my predecessor, Rosie Mendez, one of the legislative initiatives I worked on was to rename East 32nd Street and 3rd Avenue Ms. Magazine Way. And so if you're ever on 3rd Avenue and East 32nd Street, look up and smile because this is history here, and you get to walk it and see it every day in New York, and I'm just so thrilled. So, of course, Letty Cottin Pogrebin is a founding editor and writer for Ms. Magazine, the groundbreaking feminist magazine that inspired women to push back against sexist and gendered expectations, discover their own powerful voices, and break down barriers for generations of women to come. Since we're here with members of the Manhattan Jewish Historical Initiative, how has the New York Jewish experience informed your own career?
First of all, my family, both sides, came over here and settled on the Lower East Side. So I'm connected to you. Perhaps you've sensed their influence, spirit, struggle as you've walked the streets of your district. Secondly, the fervor of the New York, the chemistry of New York is totally indistinguishable from the fervor of feminism. In fact, if anybody is kind of misogynistic and sexist, and a little anti-Semitic. All we have to do to put down a woman is to say, "You're such a New Yorker," because that means that we speak up, we're forceful, we don't give up, we are articulate, we're very clear-headed, and we love to argue. So as a Jew from New York, I'm happy to own up to that full description. I think my Judaism is informed by my feminism in the sense that I insist when I'm in the Jewish world that women are given due honor and respect and have a greater kind of representation in our membership organizations, and certainly have worked toward equality in religious and spiritual life as well for the past 40-odd years. As some people here know, and I'm happy to acknowledge, and Rabbi Angela Buchdahl, I ended up with a daughter who's the president of Central Synagogue. How that happened might be a clear kind of through line from the fact that my father was the president of the synagogue in Jamaica, Queens, where I grew up. But my feminism is also informed by my Judaism, because I sat at the knees of Talmudists and rabbis. I was a very pious little kid, and I went to Hebrew school and Hebrew high school and the yeshiva of Central Queens, and I sat at the Seder table in my family every single year and heard how God liberated us, and it's incumbent upon us to liberate other oppressed peoples, and I believed it. And I incorporated it into my approach to life. And so the feminism feeds the Judaism feeds the feminism, and put it together, and it's a very demanding woman.
And as Jewish, a New Yorker, and just a woman,
Right.
give excellent directions, I'm
Yes.
sure. So as part of the Ms. Magazine team since its beginning, how have you seen feminism evolve?
Very much with ups and downs, as we can see. Who could have anticipated this moment politically, economically, socially? The future used to lie ahead in a kind of progressive way, and the backlash has been pretty astounding. I couldn't believe we elected somebody who could be so flagrantly antithetical to sort of the dignity that had already been charted by our prior president in terms of his treatment of women, of his wife, of his family, of the language, and so on. So I could not have predicted that, but I have that similar feeling about having sat on the White House lawn for the signing between Arafat and Rabin in 1993 and watching that all unravel as well. So I've learned that you never finish, and the Talmud says, you're not obligated to finish the job, but neither may you desist in it. And so, again, it's part of my heritage to just keep at it, no matter how much we backslide.
And it's interesting that you mentioned electing someone who we feel is not representative of our values, and almost feels like we're going back in time. And in the New York City Council, out of 51 members, there are only 11 women. And that's actually reduced since many years ago. The number just continues to decrease over the past 10 years, unfortunately. And it's evident how much more work is needed to mentor women for positions of leadership in politics and business. So what do you think we, men and women alike, can do to help women and girls realize their full potential?
I think it's important to educate girls so they understand that well-behaved women do not make history. That, in fact, again, as a Jew, our faith, our entire history as a people is dependent on disobedient women. The women in Jewish biblical history all kind of went outside the boundaries of the coloring book, talked back to God, talked with God, disobeyed the Pharaoh, put Moses in a basket rather than, and the midwives disobeyed. So we as Jewish women, I think, can be a template that we're never satisfied as women with the backseat role. And I think, I hope that is the case with all of you and your generation. When you see the backsliding, you have to stand up and say, we are not going to take it anymore, and keep up the struggle, keep up the struggle.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank
You
you.
certainly inspire me.
Thank you.
For this well-deserved honor.
There are two places in New York that are hard to get into. One is Rayo's in Harlem, and the other is Central Synagogue on 55th and Lexington. And we are very privileged tonight to have one of the most inspiring rabbis that I've ever met in my lifetime. People here may not know your background. Would you just share with us your journey to becoming a cantor, a rabbi, leader of one of the most prominent synagogues in America?
I had, your typical path to the rabbinate. Little girl born in South Korea to a Buddhist mom and a Jewish dad, moves to the thriving Jewish metropolis of Tacoma, Washington, where I am one of 3 Jews in my high school. Get a Jewish philanthropist sends me on a free trip to Israel called the Bronfman Youth Fellowship, and that changed my life. And I would say that is how I got here in the short term. I would say that as a child who immigrated to the United States, ended up in Tacoma, which is a very strange place to be a Jew and a Korean Jew, but found out that my Jewish family had come, of course, through New York, and the first place that they lived in America is 3 blocks from where I live today, which is its own interesting story. But I ended up feeling like I was such an outsider when I first came to the United States. Everyone said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from Korea." And then when I went back to Korea a few years later to visit all my family and friends, they said, "Where are you from?" I said, "I'm from here." They said, "No, you're not from here." And I remember feeling like such an outsider. And then as one of only a very few number of Jews in my high school, I had to fight to get student body elections not on Yom Kippur because they didn't know. So I was really the Jewish representative and felt like an outsider. But then I went, to Israel and figured out that they didn't actually think I was Jewish. And so this was a perpetual state of being a stranger. And I thought, how am I ever going to feel like an authentic Jew? But when I learned more, I think one of the most important lessons I learned is that the entire existential state of the Jew is to be a stranger, and for us to understand what it is to be an outsider, and to empathize with that, and to feel it even when we are at home somewhere. And so I guess that gave me the koach, the strength to feel like I could be a rabbi and have something to share in the Jewish community. So that's how I ended up. I mean, how I became a cantor is probably not so worth getting into. It had to do with my boyfriend who I wanted to be my husband, and they wanted to put me in the LA campus of HUC. I wanted to be in New York, so I decided I could sing a little bit, so I'd apply to cantorial school so I could be near my husband. And it worked, and I became a cantor and a rabbi. But because all of my mentors along the way, from Rabbi Rosenthal of blessed memory in Tacoma, Washington, to Rabbi Rick Jacobs, to Rabbi Michael Paley, who was on my Bronfman trip, all of these mentors were rabbis, so I really wanted to be a rabbi. That's how I ended up a rabbi.
Let's talk about Central Synagogue, because you know that a number of synagogues are hurting. They're not getting the numbers they would like to get. People are not walking through the doors they would hope would walk through those doors. What is it that Central Synagogue is doing that attracts people, many of whom feel like outsiders, and all of a sudden they come in and they're welcome? So talk about some of the ingredients of success at Central.
I like to think of Central as, one of the most inclusive and diverse evangelical mega shuls around. And I think that it is, it truly represents in many ways the diversity of New York in a way that it is diverse economically. We have, storied families that have been here and really have given back to the city in great ways. And we also have members of our community, 20% that are on some kind of dues relief, as well as homeless members of New York who are actually members of our congregation. We have different family makeups, many different family permutations. We have a lot of Jews of color in my congregation. And so it really, even though we're all and we're not actually all Jewish either, because we have quite a number of interfaith families where the non-Jewish partner are also members. So there's something that I think is reflective of the spirit and ethos of this place. It is also, I would say, a very large shul that has the spirit of like a little Hamish shtibel. And I think that when it represents New York to me in the way that when someone doesn't know New York City, they say, how can you live in that city? It's such an anonymous big place. And actually, if you live here, you know that it's just a series of little villages. And every little neighborhood and every little zip code has its own real sense of community. And you know people in your, you know, the person on the corner that sells you the fruit, and you know your shoemaker and all of that. So that is actually how it works at Central. I think that is the secret. A piece of the secret is that it is a very large place, but it's actually a series of much smaller little communities. We do that intentionally. Some of that happens organically. I would also say that we do not put rabbis on high. I think that there's a place that respects its clergy very much, but we don't use a rabbinic voice. And we have a sense of playfulness and authenticity that I think people respond to, and we don't actually wear, you know, it's not just not wearing the proverbial robe. I think it's taking that off in a real sense and just being very real with our community.
We have just about a minute left. Could you tell people about the experience you had lighting the Hanukkah candles at the White House some years ago?
So when I became the rabbi at Central, and I am the first woman to lead that congregation in its almost 180-year history, and still, unfortunately, the only woman that's leading a large congregation in Manhattan. I think because of that, Obama invited me to light the candles at the White House my first year as rabbi. And I can't describe it in any other way except it was a once-in-a-lifetime, mind-blowing experience. And I just could not believe that, you know, my mother, when I first told her at age 16 I wanted to be a rabbi, she actually got tears in her eyes and she said, "Who will ever hire you? You know, you've got 3 strikes against you at least." And I still felt deeply compelled to want to be a rabbi. It felt so much like the calling that I needed to follow, even though I wasn't sure myself, and I had moments even after I wanted to be a rabbi that I wasn't sure I wanted to hang out with Jews anymore. But I still wanted to be a rabbi, and to have become the rabbi at Central was beyond a dream, and then to be sitting at the White House and representing the Jewish community to light the candles, I thought, how did a little Jewish immigrant from Tacoma get here? That's how it felt. But it was a thrilling experience, and I was really proud to represent the Jewish community.
Just a little bit about President Jennifer Raab, if you don't already know. She's marked her 17th anniversary as president of Hunter College, the largest college in the City University of New York system. She has led the successful transformation of Hunter College from an open admissions institution to a selective, high-ranked college. Under her leadership, both graduation and retention rates have increased markedly. So let's just start from the beginning here at MJHI, which is just, what was it like growing up as a Jewish woman in New York City?
Like Dr. Ruth Westheimer, who I'm so honored to be inducted with, as well as my other fellow honorees, I grew up in Washington Heights in the 1950s and 60s, convinced that everybody in the world was Jewish, unless you were maybe Greek or Puerto Rican or Cuban. I had serious communion dress envy because Jews couldn't have those dresses, but otherwise it was a very rich Jewish life with family learning at the center. The only interesting part in Washington Heights, as Dr. Westheimer said, is there was such a very large dominant German Jewish population that those of us who were not German Jews often wondered if we were all part of the same world. And it was very clear to me that if you were a doctor, you had a German accent. And it was not till I was 15 that I found out that doctors did not have to be German, because that was very clear in our neighborhood. My father had a very big Jewish family. We would go to Seder for Pesach on the Grand Concourse, and get horseradish under our nose if we were falling asleep. So it was very much part of it, and really became very important to me when my father died when I was 8, because this large Jewish community of Washington Heights came around this very poor family and made sure that my mother had the funds to keep us really going in the neighborhood. And one of the things they did for her was found her a part-time job in the local synagogue as the bookkeeper. So that immediately put me in Hebrew school, which was a little bit unusual for girls at that time to think about being on a bat mitzvah track. I immediately got very engaged, and then got very engaged with the rabbi in a conversation about how God freed the Jews from slavery, and wanted to know why that didn't happen to the African Americans. Rabbi Buchdahl, when I didn't get a good enough answer, I got off the track of my bat mitzvah training. But the Jewish ethos of our family was also very important in the seminal moment of my life when I was accepted as one of the 3 12-year-olds from Washington Heights who made Hunter College, as they would say in those days. And you were told if you went downtown to this elite all-girls school, you would become a man-hater and a snob. And my mother, although she was not educated, that love of education, there was no question to her. She said, "You're getting on the number 4 bus." And that's really where my life began, at Hunter College High School, where learning was for girls really stressed. We were all going to college, and we were all going to have careers and make a difference.
And so it's nice to see the synergy of starting at Hunter College High School, and now you lead the institution. You are the first Jewish female president of the institution, but it's at a time of thinly veiled anti-Semitism in the form of BDS that is spreading around our country, that's even happening on campuses like Barnard. How do you confront that as a Jewish woman?
Well, I'm actually the first Jewish president of Hunter College, which is very interesting in this large, diverse city. And in my 17 years, the issue of anti-Semitism has been something that has been present on the campus. And I do think it's incumbent upon all presidents throughout the United States of colleges to acknowledge this issue and to do, I think, what Jewish people do best, to talk, to ask, to look, to learn, and to see how we can confront this problem and not run away from it. And most recently in Hunter College, we've done 2 very important things that I'm very proud of as a Jewish leader. The first is to create a space for our students as a multi-faith center. We have moved all of our faith-based groups into one area. So Hillel is next to the Muslim Students Association, next to the Hindis, next to the Inter-Varsity Christians. And this way we bring all of our students together to do activities together, to worship, and to understand each other's culture, so that we learn by talking and we learn by building community. We've also just relaunched our Jewish Studies Center, and we're so happy today to be joined by Dr. Leah Garrett, a world scholar in Judaic studies, who is really focusing on scholarship, but much more about community building. And our goal is to create a curriculum and student engagement for our Jewish students, but for much more than that, for our non-Jewish students, so they learn about Israeli cinema, or they learn about Black-Jewish connections over civil rights, and so that anti-Semitism is combated through engagement, through really talking and learning what the Jewish faith is all about, because it has had such influence on what the Hunter motto, what Hunter stands for, which is the care of the future is mine. That is our motto, and that is something that is so close to really the soul of Judaism, to think about what we can do for others, to learn, to come together, and to improve the world.
I just want to congratulate you on this award. I've known you for more than a decade at this point, and you are a force for positive change, and I can't wait to have a new Hunter building in my district. So thank you for everything that you've done.
The challenge really is how in 5 minutes can we possibly touch on even a little bit of what you've done. I mean, when you think of the number of plays that you've produced on Broadway, and then put out a publication in terms of Jewish Broadway, and now bringing Broadway to everybody through media, And on top of it, that I go to a BU alumni thing, and there you are, since I graduated the law school there, and you take a major role. The Broadway and Jewish is really fascinating to me. Why'd you do that? What interested you about that?
Well, I fell in love with the theater at an early age, and whether that's good or bad depends if you ask my parents or myself. The idea of bringing Judaism to the theater was always part of my growing up, whether it was the Tales of Sholem Aleichem or even seeing Fiddler on the Roof as a child. I'm not sure. So it was kind of a major effort for me, a real goal.
And of the many plays that you've produced on Broadway, do you have a couple that are particularly special to you in terms of what you've done?
Oh boy. Well, of course, all the babies are beautiful, but I think the most significant one was like the first one that really established me as a player in the field. And it was one of those shows that everyone said, don't do it. Don't do it, it's a career breaker. I was working on a musical called La Cage aux Folles. And they're saying, a gay musical on Broadway? You're out of your mind. I said, well, no, I mean, the story, it's a funny story. Jerry Herman has written a great score for it. Yes, the social matter is relevant and it's important, but it's fun. It's like taking medicine with sugar. You learn, it's growing. I was tap dancing like crazy. But that was really the big one. La Cage opened in Boston, got great reviews, came to New York, won the Tony Award, and it was my first Tony Award. So it was really important because it was more than just putting on a show. It became art, it became a social reason, it became almost a spiritual experience in itself.
So, as I'm listening to you, I think, what if you were in Peoria and you weren't in New York? What then? You've become Mr. Broadway in a significant way, and people look at you that way. And that's the epitome of New York. What does being a New Yorker, Manhattanite, mean to you?
Oh, Manhattan was always the Valhalla. That was the Mecca. That was, I grew up in the suburbs, out in Great Neck. And as soon as I was allowed to jump on the train at 16 and come into Manhattan, I did. Because of the excitement of the city, the hustle. I've always been a diehard New Yorker. It's a great walking city. It's, I think in my adult life, I've lived here except for 1 year in Los Angeles. And so the culture of it, whether it's egg creams, or it's Katz's Deli, or I was just talking how I lamented, I used to get the New York Times Saturday night. It was a big deal. You go out early Saturday night, get the New York Sunday Times, and bring it home. I mean, the whole idea of New York as a global center, a place where it's multicultural, different nationalities, and where else in the world can you get that sort of experience? And I said, if I could, I would want to live here the rest of my life. And I was able to live here and raise 5 children here as well.
Obviously, in terms of theater and the Jewish world, we had Yiddish theater, we have actors who came through that, came to Broadway, and had a significant role in terms of Broadway. The Jewish role in Broadway, what's your feeling about it?
I wrote a book called Jews on Broadway, so you can read all about it in the book. But the fact is, the end of the 1800s, when the Yiddish theater was established here in New York, it was a major segue into the American way of life. Major actors came out of that. Paul Muni, Edward G. Robinson, John Garfield, all came out of the Yiddish theater. It established a certain style, and in fact, established the acting style of America that is still popular today. Stella Adler, whose father, Jacob Adler, had started in the Yiddish theater. She goes to Russia, learns a new technique the Actors Studio has had now. And we still teach that as a mainstay. Brando did it. They're still doing it today. The Jewish influence on Broadway is immeasurable. Should I go on into the composers and the lyricists and the choreographers and the directors, the writers, from Arthur Miller, Elmer Rice, David Mamet, Tony Kushner, Rodgers and Hammerstein. I mean, I can go through it decade by decade, and it's amazing because it's a family. It's a family that this doesn't just happen by itself. They know each other from synagogue. They know each other from camp. They all went to Columbia University in Hunter. with Marjorie Morningstar.
So now we know why this is Mr. Broadway. And we're thrilled that you're now part of the class of 218.
It is an honor. Thank you so much.
We are, as we know, a people full of traditions, and we value and cherish our traditions. I'm sure I'm not saying anything of surprise. But our next honoree, through her leadership of a myriad of extraordinarily important organizations, has created traditions. I mean, in our household and in our synagogue, which I mentioned earlier, the annual Israel Bond breakfast was a tradition. Birthright Israel has now become a tradition of rite of passage for young people in the Jewish community. So if we are a people of tradition, and perhaps the ultimate measure of Jewish success is creating tradition, Marlene Post has done that over and over and over again through providing great leadership of organizations which really work for us day in and day out.
You know, as we spoke earlier, I kind of asked you, I said, what business card would you show somebody if they asked you?
I'd have a lot of business cards. Now, I could go back in history and say, when I said to my parents, I was 17 years old, and I said, I want to be a nurse. Well, my father almost fainted. My mother said, no Jewish girl becomes a nurse. And I said, but that's what I want to do. And I insisted upon it because I believed that that was something that a Jewish woman could make her mark in and really rise up. And so I did that. I went to Mount Sinai School of Nursing, and then I went on to college after that. But the beauty of the whole thing was I really felt fulfilled that as a Jewish woman, and I have to say my father and mother cried at the graduation ceremonies, that I wanted to do something for people because I really believe that's our role in life. Help your neighbor, help whoever you feel will benefit. And so if I won't go into all the things that I belong to and all the jobs that I do and all the, I'm a crazy person. I believe there are 7 days a week, and yes, Friday night and Saturday, I do nothing. Well, I do go to Stephen Wise. I'm sorry. But I really believe that when 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm out already doing something that will be meaningful and helpful in this world.
What would you think, I guess, what was the catalyst for you that brought you into this Jewish life of involvement in so many organizations that I was just looking through the number of organizations, and they talk about the alphabet soup of Jewish organizations, definitely in this case.
My father. My mother actually was very demure, and she was very quiet compared to my father, who belonged to every Jewish organization in Monticello, involved in the synagogue, involved in whatever. And you know what? It's funny. My father's long gone, and I look back and I say, well, Daddy, you're looking at me, and you're probably smiling because you always said you're here to help other people. And that was my inspiration, and my mother as well. But my father really did the job and belonged to many things in Monticello, New York. I was born there. You could do the math, 80 years ago. And truthfully, I think the small town life, it was a summer resort, and my father had a shoe store given to him by my mother's father. That was the dowry that went to my father. Now I'm going back in time. You probably don't even know what I'm talking about. It's okay. And so in Monticello, I grew up, and I have a younger brother. He lives in California, but he too, we learned to be there to help people and do whatever we could to make life better.
Thank you for encouraging so many people to get involved and to learn, I guess, further their Judaism and Zionism.
Thank you.
Thank you.
full disclosure here, Rabbi Telushkin and I were classmates in college. He's authored many books. You know, Jewish literacy, Jewish wisdom, ethics. He wrote my biography called Rebbe. And I often say to people who are contemplating becoming Jewish that you have to have Jewish space in your home. What does Jewish space mean? You have to designate one area of the house where you have some Jewish books, and it's a must to have Rabbi Telushkin's books. Rabbi Telushkin, you've written about Jewish literacy. There are so many opportunities to be connected with Jewish life, and yet so many people are disconnected. Talk about the state of Jewish literacy today, if you can.
And Judaism is challenged in a democratic society in a way we weren't challenged for much of our history in both Europe and in the Arab world, where anti-Semitism unified Jews, and we couldn't leave the Jewish community without converting to another religion, which would be hard for many Jews to do. So democracies basically challenge us to put up or shut up. Do we have something to teach the world or not? People can opt out of being Jewish, they can join another religion, but they don't have to. They can just assimilate. So that's why I'm sort of obsessed with the issue of Jewish knowledge and also the focus on ethics. Because I realized that one of the sad things that happened to Judaism in modernity is that the word religious became associated in people's minds exclusively with ritual observances. If two Jews are speaking about a third, a not uncommon occurrence in the Jewish community, and the question is raised, is so-and-so religious? The answer is only going to be based on rituals from which one can conclude that ethics are an extracurricular activity. So that's why I wanted to really focus on it. People don't realize something very interesting. There's the very famous teaching in the Talmud where a non-Jew approaches Hillel, what's the essence of Judaism, while standing on one foot. And he says, what's hateful unto you, don't do unto your neighbor. There are two comments I want to make about that. People don't realize, unless you look the story up in the Talmud, the non-Jew didn't say to Hillel, what's the essence of Judaism? He didn't ask Hillel a general question where we always want to establish our commonality. He actually asked him a halachic question. He said, Gaireni almanat, convert me to Judaism on condition you can teach it while I'm standing on one foot. And it was in response to that that Hillel did answer with that ethical response. The other reason is people say, why didn't he answer with love your neighbor as yourself? Akiva answered. There's, of course, the statement attributed to Jesus in the New Testament where he summarizes love your neighbor and love God. I think Hillel realized, and this is an interesting thing, and it's a challenge also about ethics. If you read a novel, you're reading a book, and it seems to be filled with cliches, you're going to throw the book down. It's boring. But every cliche started out as a fresh statement. Every one of us knows love your neighbor as yourself since we were 6 years old. So let me ask the audience a question. How many of you at some point in the last 2 months, when you had to make a decision about something, thought of the verse, love your neighbor as yourself, and it helped influence you to make the decision? It's because it got cliched. So Hillel wanted to formulate it in a fresh way. What's hateful unto you? If all of us abide by that rule for the next 24 hours, we're going to think about it. And so that's, again, I wanted to take these teachings and find a fresh way to formulate it.
You are involved in so many projects. You're a rabbi at the Synagogue for the Performing Arts. You're a prolific writer. What's next? What's the next challenge for you?
I'm actually just submitted a revision of a book I had written in the mid-90s called Words That Hurt, Words That Heal. The Jewish teachings about Lashon Hara are unusual, and I'll tell you why. It'll take just a minute. Most people, if you ask them, what does Lashon Hara mean? They said, well, it's unfair speech. And I said, is it true or not true? And they said, well, it could be either. What most people don't realize is that Lashon Hara, by definition, is true. The fact that something is true doesn't mean it's anybody else's business. Now, if you say something that's untrue, and that's defamatory, that's even worse. It's called Motzi Shemra. But I want to try and reintroduce that ethic for one day. Where people would use words in a way that don't hurt and in a way that heal. And in revising the book, I expanded greatly the section also on healing words because I become simply more aware by virtue. I became a parent late in life. I didn't get married till I was 39. And I realized the power of words to heal is as powerful as the words to hurt. And that's why I wanted to get people thinking about it.
I'll leave you with one thought. I've been with FDNY for many years, Fire Department of New York, and at a graduation I told them a story attributed to Joe Telushkin in one of his books, where a woman would hear, the fire engine passing by, or the ambulance, and what did she do? She put her fingers in her ear. One day, she needed an ambulance. And after that experience, she realized, I'm not putting my fingers in my ears anymore. On the contrary, when I hear a truck or an ambulance, I'm going to recite a blessing. The blessing is, may this person arrive safely at the destination, bring healing to the person who needs help, and return safely home. And I think that's such a powerful message of how there are certain noises we need to hear and certain blessings we need to recite. And as Joe Telushkin has done throughout his life, try to bring people a little bit closer with respect for one another. Thank you, Joe Telushkin.
Give me 20 seconds, because there's a very strict Jewish law. You always have to quote something, the name of the person who said it. You probably read it in my book, but in my book I quoted Zalman Schachter, who taught me that whenever you hear an ambulance go by, don't get annoyed, stop and pray for it. I always want Nishmato and Zecher to the blessed memory of Zalman's. My son goes to his rabbinical school. I am very, very honored, but thank you, thank you. Hey.
One of our distinguished honorees, David Harris, the leader of the American Jewish Committee, as mentioned earlier, is in Israel for the historic occasion of the opening of the American Embassy in Jerusalem. He did send words of greeting. He writes, "Dear friends, I can't tell you how thrilled I was when Howard Teach called me to let me know I was selected for the second class of the Manhattan Jewish Hall of Fame. Manhattan was where my entire family, all fleeing the Nazis, settled in the 1940s. It is where I grew up, went to school, had my bar mitzvah, covered just about every inch by subway, bus, bicycle, and foot, dreamed the dreams of youth, and encountered an immensely vibrant and enriching Jewish life wherever I turned. It was where our children were born and began their own journeys in life, starting with Jewish nursery and day schools. It is where I have been working for decades at the American Jewish Committee, surrounded by a supportive Jewish community, the rich tapestry of New York's racial, religious, and social fabric, incomparable cultural offerings, and the concentration of diplomatic and political centers of power. So the extraordinary presence of Jews in Manhattan and their indescribable contribution to civic and Jewish life, not to mention the borough's central role in my own life, how could I not be moved by such recognition? A heartfelt thank you to the organizers, sending warm regards and best wishes from Israel's most iconic city to America's, David Harris, AJC CEO.
I was thinking how to close it. The only way I can do is by saying, wow.